for the last 3 years at least, we have been trying to carve out a niche for ourselves in international studies, in the international study of Islam, as carving a niche out for ourselves on Islam and decoloniality. So, oh gosh, that sounds dreadful. On the one minute, I just accuse the universities, including our vice-chancellor, of kind of rushing onto a bandwagon. And at the next moment I says, yes, but we've been there for 3 years already. It sounds very kind of, one-upmanship. It wasn't intended like that, okay? Professor Grosfoguel is Professor of Ethnic Studies at the University of California, Berkeley. He's been a wonderful friend for a number of years, and also a colleague of mine at the Critical Muslim Studies annual summer school that we have in Granada. I serve on the faculty there, and Professor Grosfoguel is the coordinator of that program. Other than that program in Granada, he's also the head of another program in Barcelona, also on decoloniality, but more, the one in Granada is more Islam and critical Muslim studies. The one in Barcelona is more in a broader political, social context. UNISA, for the last few years, has been running a summer school on decoloniality. And sometime when the history of the Rhodes Must Fall movement gets written, I'm convinced that the seeds of that will be traced to the summer schools that UNISA have been running for the last 3-4 years. He's been a research associate of the Faculty of Science of Humanities in Paris. Is that a correct translation? I'm not going to try to do this French translation. For many years. He speaks to us tonight on racist and sexist epistemologies and the 4 genocides, epistemicides of the long 16th century. The Conquest of Andalusia and its implication for westernized universities. A bit of a longish lecture. And Ramon, I didn't see you having any notes with you. A warm welcome to you. Over to you.
Thank you. Let me give you a hand. Thank you. So basically, what I want to do today is relay my talk to the movement, okay? And to what it means to have. You talk about decolonizing the university, you need to know what you are decolonizing from. That means you need to know what exactly is about the present university that is still a colonial structure, okay? And so we need to go over that to then know exactly what are we decolonizing from. Otherwise, we're just using a slogan that is empty, okay? And so this is what I want to discuss tonight. And despite the longitude of the title, the reason I put there Conquest of Al-Andalus as very visible there is because, of course, I've been invited to by a religious studies department and wanted to put forward, the Conquest of Al-Andalus as a foundational moment in relation to all these questions. The first thing I want to say is if you look carefully at the structures of knowledge of the university today, you see that basically in most of the disciplines in the social science and the humanities, what we read as a trend, okay, with exceptional professors going out of their way to do something different. But as a trend, what you have is Western males of 5 countries as the canon of thought of the disciplines in the social science and in the humanities. Okay? So that's what we get. We get Western males of 5 countries. This is an observation that I heard for the first time from Portuguese sociologist organizer and theoretician of the World Social Forum, Boaventura de Sousa Santos. When I heard that, I was shocked. And at the moment, I said, isn't he maybe exaggerating? I mean, and then I look around, I say, he's right. I mean, you go over each discipline, and the canonical authors are white males of 5 countries. The name changed across the disciplines, but the nationalities are the same. Okay? So I'm like, wow. I got shocked when I heard that for the first time. So I kept working along this observation. It's an empirical observation. It's not even, you don't need to theorize to see this. Just go over the curriculum. Just go over what is requested from the students as theory. Just go over all these questions in different fields and disciplines in university, and you find this over and over again. So I have several observations and then a question. First thing that I found is that when we talk about the fact that you have Western males of 5 countries being the canon of thought of all these disciplines, that means that if theory is always produced in relation to social historical context and problems, theory is not coming from thinking from a cloud. Theory is always human beings face problems and we try to produce some kind of way of solving the problem, and you have from theoretical knowledge to practical knowledge about how to go about it. And so the theories produced by Western males of 5 countries are fundamentally thought in relation to the social historical problems that they were facing. That is, when I say the 5 countries, is France, Germany, Britain, USA, and on the side, Italians, on the side. But it's fundamentally, you find, depending on the discipline, different names, but the same nationalities repeated over and over again in different fields of knowledge. So when you look at this, that means that the social historical experience of these 5 countries are giving us the theories to understand the rest of the world, because we're supposed to apply these theories elsewhere. We're supposed, when we go to the university, we're supposed to go and learn what these authors have said and apply it to other realities, the rest of the world. This is the assumption, okay? The problem is that when you're talking about social science, humanities, etc., we're talking about knowledge that is produced in relation to very particular conditions and contexts, where these authors have thought certain things, but have not thought in terms of other things. That is, the problems, social historical problems of what happened in other regions of the world, okay, that have a different history and different social conditions, those problems haven't been thought by these authors. That has been thought by other authors, okay? And part of what happened is that we are, in a sense, caught in the trap of taking authors that have thought about problems in these 5 countries, that then we try to look at the world through the lenses of these authors and try to understand what happened elsewhere in relation to what these authors have produced: social theory, anthropological theory, political theory, history, philosophy, you name it. Okay, you go over the fields and you get this issue. And then the authors that are not part of this canon, that have thought about the same problems but from other geopolitics of knowledge and other body politics of knowledge, are usually out of visibility in those disciplines. They're completely out. So, and also they are inferiorized relative to the white male authors of these 5 countries. They are inferiorized. They're not seen as equal to equal. They're seen as inferior to the knowledge produced by males of 5 countries. Okay? So to decolonize, the first thing we need to do is to name things in a proper way. So if this is the foundation, epistemic foundation of the university, then this is not the university. this is something else. Because that means if we say the university, it's as if it is a neutral space. It's as if it is some kind of space that is neutral and objective and neutrality, universal, etc. When in fact, what we're having as structural knowledge is a very provincial knowledge disguised as universal. In the sense that we are having knowledge produced in relation to problems of certain parts of the world, while the problems of other parts of the world, you're supposed to understand them through the lenses of the theories that have been produced in relation to the particular social historical experience of these 5 countries. And there you have a form of epistemic colonialism. The moment you're taking knowledge produced from another geopolitics of knowledge and try to understand the rest of the world with those lenses, that where the social historical reality of those places are completely different. So you have in the canon of the disciplines, I will call the university then a westernized university. I prefer to name it that way. And the westernized university is a global structure of power. The westernized university is today a fundamental structure of the world system, because it doesn't matter where you go, you could go to Western University in Pretoria, Johannesburg, in New Delhi, in Rio de Janeiro, in New York, in Paris. You're going to read the same guys the moment you enter a classroom. So there's something there about this structure that is not just a structure that you can name as national or local or provincial. No, this is a global structure, and it's entangled with other forms of power of the modern world. That is, it is a machine of producing the westernized elites across the world, okay? And westernized elites that are going to then are crucial to the production of the international division of labor, the global capitalism, the modern world, modern colonial world, and so on, okay? So you have the intermediaries produced intellectually through the Western University everywhere. The elites that are going to do the job, that are going to be the intermediaries between the West and the rest, today, in most part of the world, are produced through this westernized university. The epistemology and the epistemological foundation of this university, I want to also name it. I call it epistemic / sexist epistemology. Racist / sexist epistemology. Racist / sexist epistemology. Why I call it racist? Because it inferiorizes knowledge, critical knowledge, from all over the world. It makes us and construct as superior, okay, the knowledge produced by certain authors and inferiorize the knowledge produced by the rest of the world. So you have a hierarchy there of superiority and inferiority along the lines of epistemic knowledge and knowledge production in general, okay? And sexist because women are out of the conversation, including women of the 5 countries, are out of the canon of thought of the disciplines in westernized universities, including women of the 5 countries, are out. When you start looking at the canon of thought, I'm not saying that there's nothing happening that is, and I'm not saying this in absolutist ways. I'm saying it as the trend, as the hegemonic trend, because of course, there are always professors, some of them present in this room, who are doing an effort going out of their way to not fall into the traps of the epistemic racist sexism of the westernized university and bring epistemic diversity to whatever they're dealing with, okay? So in a sense, we're talking about epistemic apartheid, okay? Because, and that's one of the issues, that you could finish apartheid in terms of the juridical institutional structure. But apartheid is not finished if you still have epistemic apartheid in the universities going on, where you are completely putting walls to other forms of knowledge, okay, other critical thinking produced in from other locations in the world, including South Africa. Okay, I'm talking about critical thought. And frequently what you have is that these authors are out of the conversation and the privilege of white authors of the five countries. And you have exceptions to the rule, of course. I mean, and I'm not saying this, that doesn't happen. I'm just saying, what is it that is predominant? What is it that is hegemonic? What is it as a structure that the Western university, how is it organized in such a way that is privileging these authors, okay? And what I'm trying to say is that we're talking about a global structure of power, Western university, with a particular epistemology that I name as epistemically racist/sexist. Racist in the sense that exclude and inferiorize people from all over the world, okay, who have produced critical thinking in terms of all the fields of knowledge that you can find in a westernized university, but they're not part of the canon, they're completely outside, okay, excluded from there, and consider some kind of inferior knowledge relative to Western magnified countries. And you also have the same thing, sexist, because all women are also excluded from the canon, okay? So the question now I raise is, how did we get there? How is it that in the 21st century, we are still with structures of knowledge that are so racist, so sexist, okay, and so provincial disguised as universal? How did we get there? If this is not a natural process, and if we fall into the natural argument, then we fall into biological racism, that is natural that Western men will be the source of knowledge because they have superior knowledge or they're superior to the rest, then we fall into a complete racist argument. And if we don't want to fall there, then we need to make the question, a world historical question, which is, when and how did this happen? That's the question we need to raise. When and how this happened? How did we get to that trap? Okay? How is it, when did this happen? What are the world historical processes that produce the epistemic privilege of Western males of five countries? Okay? So that's the question I'm trying to answer tonight. And bear with me because it might seem as if I got lost in the conversation. Okay? I'm going to go to Al-Andalus. Okay? I'm going to go back in time. It might seem as if, oh, this guy got lost. No, you see how we're coming back to answer the question. But to answer the question, to put it forward, I'm going to talk about 4 genocide epistemicides of the long 20th century. Genocide, killing of people. Epistemicide, destruction of their knowledge, that are constitutive of the epistemic privilege of white men of five countries. And that happened in what is called the long 16th century, 1450 to 1650. Okay? In that process is the formation of what is called the modern world. It's the formation of modernity. And in those 200 years, that is called the long 16th century because it's the foundational moment of the formation of the modern world, okay? What we call modernity, the modern world. And there are 4 genocide epistemics that I'm going to discuss now, okay, as to come back to answer the question. How did we get to such provincial, racist, sexist, epistemic structures of knowledge that are privileged in this structure I'm calling the westernized university? So I'm going to begin with the Conquest of Al-Andalus. And the Conquest of Al-Andalus is I will call it a foundational moment. I'm not going to Al-Andalus to cry. Okay?
That's Andalusia.
Andalusia, I'm sorry, yes. Al-Andalus is the name of that part of the world that belonged to Islamic civilization over 800 years, that was in the south of Europe. It included part of Italy, Portugal, Spain, etc. And over 800 years was there, and it lasted the longer in the south of Spain, okay? And that's what it was known in the Islamic civilization at the time as Al-Andalus. Today we call it Andalusia, no? But we're talking about South Europe was part of Islamic civilization over several hundred years. And in particular, south of Spain lasted like 800 years, okay? Now, what is the war historical significance of Al-Andalus? I think this is very important. I'm going there not because I want to have some kind of romantic nostalgia, okay, and cry about the loss of Andalusia, that a lot of people in the Muslim world, for good reasons, are still affected by this, the fall of Andalusia. It's a major event that still Muslims around the world keep, in a sense, some kind of nostalgia about it. I want to go back there more because it's very important to understand a lot of things of the modern colonial world. Because the first moment of the European colonial expansion was not to the Americas. The first moment of the European colonial expansion was towards the south of Spain. It was towards the conquest of Andalusia, of Al-Andalus. And there they put in place very important strategies of colonization that you're going to see for the next 500 years. Okay? So this is why I'm going there, because I think we need to understand what happened there, because a lot of these methods of colonization were extrapolated elsewhere. If there was no European colonial expansion to the rest of the world, probably the history of Al-Andalus would have been just another conquest in history, and it would have no war historical significance. But the thing is that it has that war historical significance because after the fall of Al-Andalus, they went to the Americas. And after the Americas, they went to Asia. And after Asia, they went to Africa, and so on, okay? And that's why it suddenly acquires a war historical significance. If they would have just conquered Al-Andalus and stay there, okay, and there would be no European colonial expansion to the rest of the world, probably we won't be talking about it today, okay? But I'm talking about it because of this. So we have, first, we need to understand what was Christian civilization at the time, what was Islamic civilization. To understand in Europe, I'm not talking about India, I'm not talking about other parts of Islamic civilization, I'm talking about south of what we call south of Europe today. So you have there, in the Christian side, you have basically the following structures. Everywhere, every time they were conquering the territories, they were practicing what we call today ethnic cleansing. That is, they will be cleansing the territory from Jews and Muslims and basically killing those who are not, refused to get to converted. And those who stay alive are those who are forced to conversion. Okay? And so it was a process of ethnic cleansing of the territory. Okay? So you have there, and then they will, in a sense, occupy the territory, okay, with a Christian population coming from the north. Then they will take the land, properties, house, etc. Okay? And resources. So the people who were, so basically you have the people who were directly colonized and forced to conversion. They were put in something called the encomienda. Okay? The encomienda is a structure of coerced labor where those who were converted by force, they were put in this form of coerced labor, okay, to work for the encomendero. The encomendero was one of these Christians coming from the north, taking over the land, okay? And they will be surveilling labor, exploitation of labor, but also the encomendero is in charge of surveilling their conversion. They wanted to make sure they were not faking conversion. So they will be surveilling both coerced labor and their conversion. Okay? And so the job of the encomendero was that. Another thing you have in the structure of power was that in the Christian side, you have a structure of power of unity with homogeneity. What that means is in Christendom, okay? I differentiate Christendom from Christianity. Okay? Christendom is when you have Christianity as the ideology of state power, etc. And so during that period, you have Christendom in power, and there was a notion of unity without difference in the sense that anybody who was different will be associated with evil and will be expelled from the land or burned alive, accused of being with the demon. Okay, this happened during medieval Europe. Europe at the time was a very obscurantist place, isolated from the world in many ways, in terms of trade, commerce, work production, as well as knowledge. Okay, because it was the church at the time impeded the development of critical knowledge, science, and so on. Scientists, that part of this dualistic structure of Christendom, of the goods and the bads, evil forces, spiritual forces, basically produced this situation where if you were, for example, experimenting with other forms of life or what we call nature, okay, scientists, etc., you'd be suspicious of playing with evil forces, okay? And a lot of the scientists have either hide to do their work, or there were many burned alive, okay? Because they were, in a sense, playing with some kind of evil forces. That is, everything you find around that question the dogmas of the church were immediately seen with suspiciousness, okay? And placed on the side of evil. That means that you have a civilization, in this case European Christian civilization at the time, that was basically having problems with the question of science. Couldn't develop science, okay? Second, difference with other minorities, such as other groups, other religious beliefs, and so on. There was no space for them in Christendom. They were perceived as some kind of suspicious people, evil people, and so on. Okay? Then you have also for women, for example, also women were also placed on the side of some kind of evil forces, okay, and suspicious of being part of evil forces. All of that was going on at the time on the side of Christendom. In Islamic civilization, because of the notion of tawhid, of unity with difference, there was no problem if you discover something in nature that is new, that we didn't know about, because there was no dualism between evil and spiritual, in the sense that with the notion of tawhid, if you discovered something there, you were celebrated because this is part of the creation, and you discovered something we didn't know about the creation of Allah, for example. And so scientists were celebrated on the side of Al-Andalus, okay? While in the other side, scientists were burned alive, okay? In Islamic civilization, there was the coexistence of different spiritualities, different identities in the context of Al-Andalus, where you have Christian, Jews, and other people, other religions, other identities, within the Islamic territories, in which Christian, Jews, etc., have the rights, etc., recognized, while in the other side, it was an impossibility for you to be in the territory coexisting with the Christians, okay? Because here you have the notion of unity with difference, okay, or diversity within unity, and in the other side you have homogeneity as unity, you see, or unity with homogeneity. Those notions, I think, were very important. This goes back to Christendom, the 4th century, Constantine, and the formation of Trinitarian Christianity as opposed to Unitarian Christianity. I don't have the time to go there. It's very long. I have in YouTube lectures of 2 hours on this, and I don't have the time because all of this it goes traced back to the 4th century after Jesus Christ, which is that period of Constantine, the emperor, when he became Christian, okay? And that was a way of, if you cannot fight them, join them, because Christianity was an anti-imperialist movement against the Roman Empire, and it was challenging the empire. So they decided to become Christians to neutralize the struggle of the people, you see, and then transform the theology of Unitarian Christianity towards Trinitarian Christianity. And so the notion of Tawhid was already there in the Unitarian Christianity, and they destroyed that and turned it into Trinitarian dualistic, the goods and the bads and things like this, as part of developing the emperor's privilege and resacralizing the emperor. Because part of what was happening is that the Christians were challenging the sacredness of the emperor, because the Christians were saying, you are just a terrestrial power, okay? Allah is beyond, and you are just a terrestrial power. You're not sacred or the Son of God on earth. And so they start challenging all this stuff. And so to resacralize the emperor, they became Christian and transformed the theology from Unitarian to Trinitarian. Long thing, 2 hours to explain that. I just throw it there for you to keep it in mind, because the dualism of Christendom comes from that time, okay? And it was developed further. But the point is that you have at the time these two structures coexisting. In Islamic civilization at the time in Andalusia, there were, for example, right to divorce. There are cases of many women in the Christian side that cross to the Muslim side to be able to divorce. Okay, this is very interesting stuff happening in Spain at the time, okay, between the two coexisting civilizations. As you know, in Christianity, divorce is a recent thing. It's just 20th century thing, and still in many countries, it's still forbidden, Christian countries, okay? So, while in Islam, women could divorce. Women could have property, recognition of property rights for women, etc. So there was all these things happening at the time. And then you have also the recognition of difference, of minorities inside the structure of power of the Sultanate in Andalusia, where Jews, Christians, other people were recognized in the rights, etc., while in the other side, there was an impossibility. So I'm just saying that just to understand a little about, okay, there is a conquest of one to the other, but the question is, we need to know what was being destroyed in the conquest and what was being replaced in that conquest. So we have some idea of what's going on. Otherwise, it's, the conquest of Andalusia. So what? Okay, what is it about? Well, it's about a form of power that is being destroyed, that have the characteristics I just mentioned, in this case, Islamic civilization in Andalusia, and the imposition of the other form of power that I've been describing as Christendom, imposed there. Okay, so this is like what happened. Now, the issue is that in terms of colonial methods, the encomienda that I mentioned, they brought Christians from the north, take over the land, take over properties, etc. And this is what in colonial history is known as settler colonialism. Encomienda was an institution put forward as part of a settler colonialist project that began there in Andalusia. They cleaned the land from Muslim and Jews, and then they occupied the land with Christians. And those Muslim and Jews who survived the conquest by being forced to conversion were then submitted to the encomienda for coerced labor and forced conversion and surveillance of the conversion. The other thing they did was burning the libraries. Just to have an idea about the difference of the two civilizations in relation to knowledge production, keep in mind that at the time, the Cordoba library has 500 million books in Cordoba, okay, during Islamic civilization. Granada library has 250,000 books. The largest library in Christian Europe at the time did not have 1,000 books. Just keep that in mind, just to give you, like, what is the relation to knowledge of the two civilizations that are coexisting to each other there, okay? In Christian Europe, you couldn't have a library of that big, okay? And the relation to knowledge was so obscurantist that, for example, if you read a book of Aristotle or Plato, you'd be at risk of being burned alive. It was forbidden to read the Greeks. How did the Greeks arrive to Europe? They arrived through the Islamic philosophers of Andalusia. That's how Greek philosophy arrived there. Okay? And all the knowledge of the time, like knowledge about astronomy, knowledge about medicine, knowledge about all this knowledge were highly developed in Islamic civilization, especially Andalusia, because it was connected with that corridor that goes from Africa, Middle East, South Asia, east of China, Indonesia, in Mindanao, in Philippines. Knowledge was going back. It was not only trade, but also knowledge, translations, etc., going back and forth. While Christian Europe was, in a sense, isolated in an obscurantist way from the rest of the world at the time. Okay? So you have also in the period of Andalusia, all this knowledge arriving to what we call Europe today, okay, and influencing also people on the Christian side that will go to the other side to check it out, okay, and to see all these books, etc. So they start translating some of the books from Arabic to Latin and so on, okay. That's how the Greeks arrived to, and a lot of the sciences. Just keep in mind that we celebrate Copernicus, right? 600 years before Copernicus, the school of Baghdad have already made the demonstrations of that we today attribute to Copernicus. And there is the book of George Saliba demonstrating how Copernicus was using the material from the school of Baghdad. Okay? In the book of George Saliba on Islamic sciences and the Renaissance, okay? Where he shows the influence of all science. How did that arrive there? It arrives through the libraries of Al-Andalus. And what happened is that when they were burning the libraries, they have people who could read Arabic and take out books that they found, that they were curious about and put it on the side. And all those books were taken to the church, okay, to the authority of the church, to Toledo and later to Rome. And so these books arrived to Europe with all this knowledge, and this is at the foundation of what we call modern sciences. These modern sciences were, in a sense, an appropriation of Europe over the knowledges and sciences coming through the door of Andalusia into Europe. Okay? So that process is bearing history, because what we get later is an erasure of that memory, and what we get later is the celebration of white European males as the ones who have produced science, while a lot of these white European male scientists were already influenced by the knowledge coming from Islamic civilization. But this is erased in history. So we have two processes here, genocide and epistemicide. When they burn the libraries, when they conquer, they burn libraries, and part of the attempt is to precisely, today we have a good language for that with the computers, delete a program and then re-upload another program into the computer. So part of burning libraries is not only that you're attempting to destroy the knowledge of the people you're conquering, but also you're trying to destroy the memory. Okay? You're trying to destroy the history and then put in place a new program. You delete and put in place a new program. with a new narrative from the point of view of the conquerors. You see, so this is part of what happened in Andalusia. Okay, so look at this. We're talking about process of settler colonialism, already there in Andalusia through the encomienda. We're talking about a process of ethnic cleansing of territories and population. We're talking about a process of epistemicide, okay, attempting at destroying the knowledge, structures of knowledge, as well as the memory. And then the forced conversion that is going to now become very important, because after 3 generations, 4 generations of people converted to Christianity, that memory is lost. And after burning the libraries, then you don't have access to alternative narratives. And so immediately you have a process of colonial mentality or colonizing the mind of the subjected people. Okay, so all of this is happening there. And then there's another thing happening there, which is that now they put a structure of power or political authority that have the pretension of having the identity of the state corresponding one-to-one to the identity of the population. This is the moment of what we can be calling the proto-nation state idea. The idea of the nation state, one state with one identity and one population. Okay? Now, this is already happening in the Conquest of Al-Andalus. This is very important. So you have settler colonialism, epistemicide, and the beginnings of this thing we call nation state. Because they are imposing a political authority of one identity, Christians, and one population. Everybody has to be Christian. Even if you were Muslim, you have to be converted to Christianity, otherwise we kill you. So everybody has to be the same. Christianize or I'll kill you was the slogan. Okay? So now what happened is, here comes Columbus with the enterprise of the Indies and arrive and meet with Elizabeth. Okay? Queen Elizabeth and King Ferdinand, 1490, 1491. And here come with the enterprise of the Indies. Enterprise of the Indies, that's another long conversation. I don't have the time to discuss, but he was going with maps. This idea that he was risking his life, because at the time people believed that the earth was flat and he would go like this at some point, and he took the risk of going there. That's fairy tales. That's nothing to do, because at the time people knew that the world was rounded. And Islamic civilization have already demonstrated this. And also Chinese and Muslim civilization both have already developed the technology to navigate in deep sea, okay, in the deep ocean, without having to go through the shores. Okay, all of that was already known. Columbus knew this stuff. He was a trader of maps. So he had a lot of these maps that were produced by Muslim navigators and Chinese navigators that were historical maps, world maps where you can see the cartography of the world, etc. So he knew where he was going, but the only problem he had was that the maps couldn't be understood by any European. Because at the time, Europeans didn't know about those maps. He knew that there was this line on the other side in the maps, but he didn't know how to name that. So he thought he has arrived to India. He thought he was in India. Indigenous people in the Americas, because of Columbus' geographical ignorance, are called Indians. Still today. Because he thought he was in India. And he died thinking he was in India. He never knew he was elsewhere. Okay? And they call all the population they saw there Indians. Okay? And this is a colonial term, of course. Because people over there didn't call themselves Indians. There was all kind of different identities. But they call themselves, they use the term Indian. And in that meeting, he tells the queen about this project, and the queen said, yes, but first we need to finish with Granada, the last sultanate of Al-Andalus, unify the whole territory into one crown, one identity, one population, okay, and then we go elsewhere. Make a long story short, January 2, 1492. January 2, 1492, is the fall of Granada. Okay? January 11, 1492, comes Columbus to the Palace of Alhambra. If you know Granada, Palace of Alhambra. So they occupied the palace of the Sultanate administration, and immediately King and the Queen established their court there. And that in one of the rooms, Columbus met with the Queen and get the royal authorization and the resources, gold, money, to go into the first voyage to the Americas. Okay? Now, the interesting thing is how, when he arrived, then he arrived to Americas October 12th. I'm using Americas as a term to understand each other. That place was not called the Americas at the time. It was called, had many names. There were places called Tahuantinsuyo, other places called Teotihuacan, other places called Abiyala. There are other indigenous names there. So this Americas name is another colonial term. The same way as Indios, Indians is another colonial term. But anyway, I'm saying the America for the purpose of understanding each other. So he arrived to America October 12, 1492. That's 10 months after the meeting with Elizabeth. And he goes down the boat, 1 hour, 2 hours. He comes back. I call him the first Western anthropologist. Okay? You know that you have a lot of British, French, German anthropologists, Americans. They go study a so-called tribe. They go 2 weeks to a tribe, and then they write a book, and then they're experts of the tribe. Okay? So it's like, and this guy went down 2 hours, came back and put in the diary, these are people without religion. People without religion. He wrote that down. This concept of people without religion is going to create now, okay, a huge debate for the next 60 years. Because if I tell you these people have no religion, today in the 21st century, you might think I'm telling you that these people are atheists. But in the late 15th century, in Christendom imaginary, it has a different connotation. Humans have religion, have gods. God, one God, many gods, one religion, whatever. But humans have religion. You might have the wrong one. You might have the inferior God. You might have the inferior religion. I try to convert you. Okay? And they use the term purity of blood in the Conquest of Al-Andalus. But purity of blood meant something different to what we mean today. Because purity of blood in the Conquest of Al-Andalus meant, I want to know the genealogy of your family to know if you're purely Christian, and if you're purely Christian, we don't surveil you. But if you have a grandmother that is Jewish, or a grandfather is Muslim, or whatever, we need to survey you to make sure you really converted. And they have a category to name the population coming from Jewish and Muslim background. At the time, Moriscos, Moors, was the term used to call the converted Muslims, and Marranos was the term used to call the converted Jews. Okay? So they have these categories to also classify the population, to make sure they surveil them. Even after 2-3 generations, they were already born Christian, but they would surveil them if they were not. They wanted to make sure they were not practicing their religion, secretly or something like that, okay? Or faking conversion, that kind of thing. So this thing was ongoing over several decades after the Conquest of 1492. And in the Americas, something else happened. Because when Columbus put there people without religion, what it meant at the time is if they don't have religion, that means they don't have a God. And if they don't have a God, that means they don't have a soul. And if they don't have a soul, that means they're not human. That means they're like animals in the fauna, in nature. Okay? And that classification of people without religion, that is people without a soul, became the first moment in world history where you have the production of a system in which the organizing principle of the political economy is based on this question of people with soul, people without a soul. people who are animals and people who are humans. This classification is already a racial classification. And that racial classification, watch carefully, because at the moment it was not color. It was a theological form of racism already. They were classifying the population based not on color, but based on if you have a soul or not. That was the way they did it at the time. And immediately they enslaved the indigenous population of the Americas. And that began a huge debate over 60 years, because there were voices inside the church saying, wait a minute, what if these people have a soul and we are doing these atrocities? We're all going to hell. So the debate began inside the church, because there were people inside the church saying, hey, what are we doing here? What if these people are human? Look what we're doing. Be careful. We might go to hell. And that debate began. The Spanish Empire have already made a decision, of course. They enslaved them, assuming that these are people without soul. Therefore, they are like animals in nature, like a cow or a horse that you can put in the labor process, you see. And therefore, they were classified in similar ways and put into slavery, as any animal in the fauna, to do kind of jobs that were, kind of animal-like. So that debate continued. It's a long history. I'm not going to go into all the details. But in 1552, the King of Spain, because of this debate, decided to put a trial, a tribunal, to decide over the methods of the conquest. And say, okay, are they really justified, or are they wrong and, a sin in the eyes of God and that kind of thing? He puts the trial, 1552, the School of Salamanca in Valladolid, and the debate is between two theologians. At the time, the authority of knowledge was in the hands of the church, and they have two theologians to debate this, Gines Sepúlveda and Bartolomé de las Casas. Gines Sepúlveda was siding with the people who were already calling for these people have no soul, people without soul. Okay, Gines Sepúlveda. Las Casas was siding or claiming these people have soul, these people are humans, but they're barbarians that we need to Christianize. So you have here the two positions. Here, that trial have world historical significance for several reasons. First reason is, here you have the two main discourses used by the West to colonize the rest. People without soul turned in the 19th century, when the authority of knowledge moved from the church to pseudo-scientific biology and natural science, turned from people without soul in the 16th century with theology as the foundation of knowledge to people without the human DNA in the 19th century with the new so-called pseudosciences, okay? With the Lyman process and turning into science as the authority of knowledge. From people without soul to people without the human DNA. Scientific racism in the 19th century, but it's a continuity from the 16th century. In the 16th century, you already have this notion of the human, the non-human, the human and the animal. Okay? The racist notion is already there with a theological argumentation. Later, it became scientific racism. And then the Las Casas position, barbarians to be Christianized, with pseudo-social sciences in the 19th century, white supremacist social scientists turn into, especially in anthropology, turn from barbarians to be Christianized, the Las Casas position, into primitive to be civilized. Primitive to be civilized. So look at the secularization of this theological Christian narrative in the 16th century, turned now into pseudo-scientific knowledge. Okay? But you see the continuities there. That's one of the world historical significance of that trial, that it coined in a very clear way the two main discourses used by the West to colonize the rest. Today, in the social science, we use the term biological racism, which is the line of Sepúlveda, and cultural racism, which is the line of Las Casas. So you have these two lines. In the social science, we use these two terms today. Okay? But it has a long durée, long history of several centuries. Okay? Now, the other word historical significance of this trial is the question about, although in the long run, Sepúlveda won the trial, in the short run, the trial was won by Las Casas. So they decided, you know what, indigenous people might have a soul, but they're barbarians that need to be Christianized. Okay? They're barbarians that need to be Christianized. So what did they do? They took indigenous people away from slavery and put them in a form of coerced labor called the encomienda. They took the system of the encomienda from the Conquest of Al-Andalus and they brought it to the Americas and implemented among indigenous people. Put them in a form of coerced labor, and the encomendero will arrive, surveil their exploitation of their labor, but also surveil their conversion, because these are barbarians to be Christianized. So they brought that from the Conquest of Andalusia into the Americas. Okay? And then who is doing now slave labor? Now that you took all the indigenous people away from slave labor and put them in this other form of coerced labor, who is going to do slave labor now? That's when they decide to organize an industry of mass kidnapping of people in Africa, okay, and produce what I prefer to call the captive trade, not the slave trade. It's a captive trade. They kidnap people in the millions in Africa and through the passage took them to the Americas to be enslaved there. So this is not, we need to watch our language. This is not a slave trade. This is not African slaves. These are people who are free, were kidnapped, and took by force to the America to be enslaved over there. But in the language we have, many times we use this term, you know, this African slave trade and so on, when in fact it's as if there were, you know, Africans in the shore of, you know, the beaches of the Atlantic of Africa waiting, I'm here, I'm a slave, take me in a cruise to the Caribbean. No, we're talking about something more profound. That is the kidnapping, mass kidnapping of people, okay? And taken in mass numbers to the Americas to be enslaved there, okay? And then we have the other thing that happened in the Americas was that not only they went through this encomienda of Andalusia, extrapolated there, but also they burned their codices and they burned their quipus. What are the codices and quipus? These were the forms of writing and archival of knowledge of indigenous people. They didn't have what we know as a book. They do it through textile, the archival of knowledge through textile, and through imprinting hieroglyphics in a form of paper, okay, that were the codices. And all this was burned by the conquest. So they brought from Andalusia these two methods, okay, of the encomienda, and, the ethnic cleansing and so on, and also the epistemicide, destruction of knowledge structures, okay, destruction of the archival of knowledge, okay. So all of this is happening in the long 16th century, okay, and then they went into the conquest of African people to bring them to the Americas at the same time, and in that process they killed millions of people in the process of kidnapping them in Africa, in the process of the passage in the boats going there, and in the process of being enslaved over there. There was a process of genocide there of populations at the same time that you have epistemicide, in the sense that they did not allow Africans to practice their spiritualities nor their knowledges. They were forbidden to do that in the context of slavery in the Americas, in the plantations. So you have a process here of genocide, epistemicide happening in all these levels. Then what happened? In the conquest of Andalusia in the 16th century, it continues, okay? It continues to the 16th century. And then what happened, we have seen how the methods of the conquest of Andalusia were extrapolated to the Americas. But now we're going to come back and look at how the conquest of the Americas are going to reshape the conquest of Andalusia. How is that? Now they start reclassifying the Moriscos with the concept of soulless people. Now they start saying Morisco are soulless people. This is a very important moment. Please pay attention to it. This is a very crucial, important moment of world history, because this is the moment when medieval Islamophobia and medieval Judeophobia turn racial. Which is, what do I mean? Islamophobia and Judeophobia in the Middle Ages and in the conquest of Al-Andalus is still not a fully racist thing. It's still a form of religious discrimination. I want you to convert to me. That's it, okay? If you don't do it, then I can't even kill you for that, but I still conceive you as a human. What happened with the concept of soulless people that comes from the conquest of Al-Andalus, from the conquest of the Americas, with the narrative about indigenous people of not having a soul, is that when it comes back to Andalusia, it transforms the old religious form of discrimination, Islamophobia, Judeophobia, and turn them into racial, because now the question is not anymore that you have the inferior God or the inferior theology. The question is now that you yourself, you are inferior person. Because now the question is more profound. It's about the humanity of the person. You're a soulless being. Therefore, you are more in the animal sphere than in the human sphere. And these were the Moriscos. Now we're talking third and fourth generation of Christians, not anymore Muslims, born Christians, baptized Christians, that are going to be classified as people without a soul. Okay, so this is very important. Now the theology is not the issue. Now it becomes something else. And that something else is the question, the dehumanization of the population below the line of the human. So we saw how the conquest of Al-Andalus influenced the conquest of the Americas, but now I'm talking about how the conquest of the Americas reclassify and influenced the conquest of Al-Andalus. You see? So these are not linear histories. These are histories that are going back and forth. Okay? And we need to understand this in this dynamic way. Now, there is a fourth genocide epistemicide that is happening at the same time, which is also very interesting, that usually we don't put together. And that fourth genocide epistemicide is the conquest of women in Europe, where they are being burned alive, accused of being witches. There is a mass genocide of women in Europe that now, at the same time that you have the conquest of Al-Andalus, genocide epistemicide, against Muslim Jews, the conquest of America, genocide epistemicide against Africans and indigenous people. Now you have another genocide epistemicide in the conquest of women in Europe accused of being witches. And they're going to be burned alive. While they were burning the books of Al-Andalus and they were burning the codices and quipus of the indigenous people in the Americas, in the case of women in Europe, this was knowledge that was transmitted orally from generation to generation, not through books. The books were their bodies, and so they burned their bodies. They were the books. Their bodies were the books. They were the ones carrying the knowledge, ancestral knowledge, because in fact they were indigenous women. They were indigenous people all over the world. We know that. Today we have this idea, because of the modern racist project, that when we think of indigenous people, we always think about people who have dark skin. These were blonde-haired, blue-eyed women. But they were indigenous to Europe. They were not whites in the way we understand whiteness today. They were indigenous in the sense that they were practicing in terms of their cultural subsistence, in terms of their communities, in terms of their relation with other forms of life, in terms of their cosmologies, knowledge. These were sages. Indigenous women were sages who knew a lot about astronomy, medicine, the plants, all kind of stuff. And they have, in a sense, indigenous ways of living that were transmitted from generation to generation orally. And they have an autonomy in their community and a lot of power because of their knowledge. That's when the new capitalist aristocracy that is expanding to America and creating a new capitalist world market with the expansion to the Americas, now they go after them because they see them as a threat to the patriarchal structures of the new imperial colonial Europe. So the process of colonization and destruction of genocide epistemicide was not only towards the people elsewhere, it happened inside Europe too. They went after the people or the population or the communities that were not fitting into this modern colonial project, that were in a sense a challenge, and that were in a sense having some kind of power and resistance to the press. So they went in a mass way after this woman and they burned her alive, accused of being witches. So far I've been talking about genocide epistemicide against Muslim Jews in the Conquest of Andalusia, genocide epistemicide against indigenous people in the Conquest of the Americas, genocide epistemicide against African people in the Conquest of Africa and the enslavement, mass enslavement of Africans in the Americas, genocide epistemicide against women inside that territory we call today Europe. Okay? So here you have the formation of the racial patriarchal structures of the modern world. The modern world was constructed and built upon the shoulders of sexism, racism, of patriarchy, and racial structures of domination. Why I'm saying that? You'll see that in a second. Now we go to the 17th century. In the 17th century, we go to a philosopher called René Descartes. René Descartes is considered to be the foundation of modern Western philosophy, right? And René Descartes, that's a question mark because it's another discussion. I don't want to go there because Enrique Dussel claims that Descartes, in fact, was repeating many of the things of the philosopher, theologian, Christian theologian of the Conquest of the Americas. And he was trained with the Jesuits who were already reading the books produced by Suarez, by Las Casas, by Sepúlveda, all these people. He was trained in a school in France with all this literature, all this, they were highly influenced, but that's another discussion. The point is that he's considered a foundation of modern philosophy. And here comes Descartes and say, I think, therefore I exist. Okay? This is a famous slogan. What he's doing there is he's taking, remember, Christian Europe had to secularize to be able to produce science. That's not the case in China. That's not the case in the Islamic civilization. That's not the case of the Mayas in America. Had the most precise calendar of the world in 1492 with an immense capacity of prediction of lunar and solar eclipses. Okay? And we know it's an amazing calendar in terms of prediction, all of that, but we don't know how they did it because they burned the codices. You know, and so we don't know how they arrived to that knowledge, but the knowledge is there, you know, that they got there, you see? Through some kind of empirical science, we don't know, okay, how they did it. But anyway, the point is that you have all these developments going on elsewhere, and here comes Descartes and say, I think, therefore I exist. And the I think is an idolatric I think. What I mean by idolatric is that he says that this I is going to extrapolate the attributes of the Christian God into this I. If Christian God can produce a knowledge beyond time and space, he transferred that to this I. He's going to secularize the attributes of Christian God into this I. He's going to say, this I can produce a God-I view. And that God-I view means that it can produce a knowledge that is the knowledge of all knowledge. It can produce a knowledge that is beyond time and space, universal beyond time and space. It can produce a knowledge that is objective in the sense of neutrality. Okay? It can produce a knowledge that is not situated, non-situated. Okay? So now you have, look, today we still carry on in social science Cartesian criteria to say what is valid scientific knowledge and what is not. Be careful, because this is still pretty much alive, the Cartesian epistemology. But the point is that Cartesian epistemology is going to claim that this I has a God-I view. Okay? And therefore it falls into idolatric perspective. This I thing is idolatric. It thinks of himself as God on earth. Okay? And so the question is, how come in the mid-17th century you have now, for the first time in world history, a philosophical tradition that is founded on the assumption, on the arrogance, or the arrogant assumption of thinking that this I, that is going to be the new foundation of knowledge away from God and away from the church, is God-like. Okay? Is the God-I view. Okay? And the question Enrique Dussel raises, philosopher of liberation in Latin America, is what are the military, political, economic conditions of possibility for that? But before we go there, Descartes needs two things to claim the God-I view. Ontological dualism, that is, he needs to have a dualism of mind and body as two different substances to be able to claim the God-I view. Why? What if the mind thinks from a body? What if the mind thinks from a body? If that's the case, you cannot claim a God-I view. And you cannot claim a God-I view because that means you're thinking from a particular location in the world, you don't have a God-I view, you're situated, you see, and therefore you cannot claim a God-I view the moment your mind is in a body. But if you claim that there is a split between mind and body as two different substances, and you put the mind to be floating, and thinking from a cloud, unsituated knowledge, okay? If you make that claim, then he needs that ontological dualism to be able to claim the God-I view. So the mind is floating in a cloud like God, okay? And it's a point of view of all points of view. It's not determined or conditioned by anything particularistic in the world. That's what allows then this I to produce a knowledge that is beyond time and space, which is the God-I view, okay? And a knowledge that is the knowledge from knowledge, okay? Or the point zero, in the sense that is objective as neutral, you see? Now, the other thing he needs is methodological solipsism. Methodological solipsism. That is, the subject is going to arrive to certitude in knowledge through a monologue that raises question and answers question with himself, and the gender here is on purpose, okay? I will explain why. With himself. A knowledge where is going to be produced in an internal monologue. That's the methodological solipsism. Why he needs that? To make the God-I view claim. What if human beings produce knowledge dialogically in social relation with other human beings? Then the whole argument falls apart of the God-I view. That means you're producing knowledge in relation to a concrete social historical condition. That means you're not God. You're limited, okay? And therefore, the whole thing falls. That's why he needs also methodological solipsism. But then comes Dussel and asks, from where is this guy thinking from? What is the geopolitics of knowledge of Descartes? Where is he thinking from? Okay? Situating his knowledge, attempting to situate, I want to say he was doing this in the 60s, because later on you have a whole literature in the 80s and part of the 70s of feminists also criticizing the Cartesian move of unsituated knowledge, but we have to recognize that Enrique Dussel was saying this way before, okay, just to clarify this, with the concept of geopolitics of knowledge, and say we're not thinking from an ego politics of knowledge like Descartes, unsituated, etc. We're thinking from a location in the world, and so there is a geopolitics and body politics of knowledge involved in everything we do. So there's some limits to how far can we go in knowledge production. We're not God, okay? God is beyond, in any case. So the point is that here he answered the question, he said, this I think, the conditional possibility of this idolatric I think, is 150 years of I conquer, therefore I exist. The I conquer, therefore I exist is the conditional possibility for the idolatric arrogance of the I think, therefore I am. Okay? So the point he's making is that you cannot delink this Cartesian move, okay? And I'm talking more about the appropriation of the car in relation to empire and empire building, okay? Because this is what happened, like the Cartesian move that inside Europe became some kind of critique to the limits that the authority of the church were putting in the production of science, you see? It was appropriated by the European empires and now turned, you see, back into the colonies, you see, and make it into a kind of epistemology of colonization and domination. Okay? I want to make that distinction clear in the narrative. And so what he's saying, that the constitutional possibility of that arrogance of claiming godlike knowledge is 150 years of I conquer, therefore I am. Once you become the center of the world in terms of conquest, then you get rid of God and you will become God on earth. But what I want to say is the following. What I want to say is that, and this is like a supplementary point I made to do so, which is the translation from the I conquest to the idolatric I think is not automatic. You could have I conquer without turning or resulting in an idolatric I think. What turns the whole thing into the idolatric I think is that the I conquer and the I think are mediated by I exterminate, therefore I exist. It's the I exterminate that comes in and mediates the I conquer with the idolatric I think. Why do I say I exterminate, therefore I think? Genocide, epistemicide. By the time Descartes is writing, he's writing from Amsterdam at the moment that Amsterdam becomes the new center of the European world system that is created with the 1492 European expansion to the Americas. Okay? Now the Dutch, after the 30-year war, displaced the Iberian Peninsula, and the Dutch become the new center, Amsterdam. And Descartes is theorizing from there. Okay? So, when he says, I think, therefore I exist, in the common sense of the time, and this is why I'm insisting on the I exterminate, therefore I exist. In the common sense of the time, it was very clear after the conquest of Al-Andalus that I could not be a Muslim and could not be a Jew. After the conquest of the Americas, that I could not be, in the common sense of the time, an indigenous person. After the conquest of Africa and the enslavement, mass enslavement of Africa in the Americas, that I could not be an African. After the conquest of women in Europe, that I could not be a woman, not even a European woman. In the common sense of the time, it became very clear who was that I. Who was that I? And that I is who is left. Western man. But now it's not any Western man. Because after the 30-year war, you have the split of North and South Europe. So now, the Iberian man is already subalternized relative to Northwestern European man. Even though the Iberian Peninsula began the whole thing, and all the racist project, they ended up subalternized inside Europe, displayed by the Dutch. Later came the British, etc. Okay, but they became subalternized as south of Europe, inferiorized relative to that Western, Northwestern Europeans. And now we're talking about a very restricted, notion of who is the I. Okay, is Western man, well, it's not any Western man. Here comes 100 years later Kant. And Kant, I mean, we read all these authors with a lot of generosity. Because we read Descartes and we read, I think, therefore I am. Oh, that's me. No. That's not 80% of humanity and most of the people in this room. Okay? We read the transcendental subject of Kant and we say, oh, he's talking about me. No. You're very generous because when he writes in his anthropological writings, it's very clear who is the transcendental subject. He says, white man north of the Pyrenees Mountains. The Pyrenees Mountains are the dividing mountains between Spain, the Iberian Peninsula and France. He said, north rationality is in the white. Now, Kant is using color because after the the enslavement of Africans, then you have the color racism coming with a force and displacing this old theological racism, okay? And now he's saying white men north of the Pyrenees Mountain have access to rationality, and the yellow man, black man is indigenous people in the Americas, have no rationality, rational beings, and of course he doesn't talk about women because women are out of the conversation for these Enlightenment philosophers. And so now you have the structures of knowledge where you have Western men of very particular locations, okay, not any Western man, becoming the authority of knowledge. And now the first Westernized secular scientific university is Humboldt University in Berlin in the 18th century that is based and founded under a Humboldtian Kantian philosophy. And from the beginning, they have as a structure of knowledge epistemic racist sexism there that are produced as part of or are constitutive, are being constituted by these 4 genocide epistemicides that I've been describing to you in the long 16th century that gave Western men of the 5 countries the privilege over the rest. Okay? And now this university is going to be globalized and becoming now, this type of university becomes the university, the Western university is going to be a global structure of power of the world system, okay? Carrying over this Eurocentric fundamentalism all over the world, okay? And this racist, sexist epistemology all over the world, okay, disguised as some kind of universal, scientific, objective, etc. knowledge. To finish, the question is the following. Why is it that in the 21st century, that's why I'm so happy with the, Rhodes Must Fall movement in South Africa, because they are challenging this. And they're putting on the table the fundamental questions that need to be put in relation to all these questions, which is decolonize the university. Why is it that in the beginning of the 21st century, we are in the 21st century, why is it we still carry over these provincial, racist, sexist structures of knowledge? How is it that we are still with that? There is an answer to that. My answer is the following. In the 16th century, my answer is the reason why these structures of knowledge are still with us with a force and haven't been overcome is because they are tied and entangled with the structures of power. Coloniality of knowledge is entangled with the coloniality of power. And that's why they're still there. 16th century, Christianize or I kill you. Millions of people killed in the name of Christianize or I kill you. If my knowledge is superior to yours, I know what is truth, I know what is reality, and I also know what is good for you. It doesn't matter what you say is good for you, because whatever you say is inferior knowledge to me, and I know better than you what is good for you. So if I have to kill you to save your soul from your barbarianism, I'll kill you. And it's good for you. Millions of people killed in the name of that. 19th century, civilize or I kill you. Millions of indigenous people killed in the 19th century all over the world in the name of civilize or I kill you. I know what is better for you. You should get rid of that, the way you dress, the way you pray, the way you behave, the culture you have, the language. You should get rid of that. I try to persuade you. Through peaceful discussion. But if you don't understand through peaceful, I will have to use force. I know what is better for you. If you don't do it, then I have to kill you for the sake of progress and civilization. You are an obstacle to progress and civilization. So if I have to kill you, I'll kill you for the sake of civilization and progress. Millions of indigenous people killed. 20th century, develop or I kill you. You are underdeveloped. You don't know what development is. I know what development is. Here is the recipe. Open doors to transnational capitalist investments. Offer cheap labor. Okay? Allow for tax-free incentive for the companies. Open door for the exploitation of your resources. Here's the recipe. You resist, you don't like it. We'll have to do then something about it. We'll have to use force because I know what is better for you. So here comes the coup d'etat, military developmentalist dictatorships put forward all over the world, not just in Latin America, in Africa and in Asia, in the name of develop or I kill you. I know what is better for you. You don't understand my peaceful means, I will have to use force. And they impose military dictatorship, developmentalist military dictatorship all over the place. In Indonesia, in the first month of the coup d'etat, in 1965, they killed 1 million people. First month of the coup d'etat. And this happened all over the world. Millions of people killed in the name of develop or I kill you. Here comes now neoliberalism. They know what is better for you. This is the economists of Harvard, economists of Chicago, Oxford, Paris, Sorbonne, etc. They know what is better for you in terms of the economy. And if you don't understand it by peaceful means, you have to understand it by force. Early 20th century, democratize or I kill you. Here comes, you are authoritarian, you're despotic, even though a lot of these dictators were put forward by them during the time of develop or I kill you. Putting all these developmentalist dictators there. But now they say, no, it's that you have a culture that is authoritarian and despotic. So, democratize or I kill you. Here I come with the tanks, the airplanes to teach you democracy. Right? Millions of people killed in Iraq. Millions of people killed in Afghanistan. Millions of people killed today with the drones in Yemen, in Pakistan, in all over the place. We're talking about a civilization of death. This is a civilization of death, like indigenous critical thinker has always been reminding everybody in the world. This is a civilization of death. And it's a civilization of death not only because it has killed more human beings than any other, but also because it has destroyed other forms of life in a way that no other civilization has done. Okay, in the past, to the point that we don't know if we'll be able to be alive 100 years from now. We don't know who will survive Western civilization. And I say Western civilization. I didn't say, we humans are so destructive. I say Western civilization is destroying the planet. Because the West, when it's about their achievements, then they claim, we are the West, we achieved that. When it's about the bad things, they say, we're the human. We are humans. We are so bad. No. It's the West. Western civilization. Through this crazy dualism of nature, human. This division. Where nature is something exterior to the human. And nature is a means towards another end. With that cosmological Cartesian dualism, any technology you build with that rationality has in itself the destruction of life. Okay? Because you're going to just produce technology as the structure of life because you haven't thought about reproducing life. Because you think of nature as something exterior to the human. As if you destroy nature and it won't affect you. Now, with other notions, such as, let's put Pachamama, who are holistic notions, or the notion of Tawhid in Islam. holistic notion. There are different forms of life coexisting inside one cosmos. And where there's no dualism in that sense, you have a different understanding of those forms of life that coexist with human life. And whatever you do in relation to these other forms of life, which are not nature and objects, but other forms of life, you need to take into consideration, okay, that the reproduction of life, that is what they call nature, is not anymore a means towards an end, it's an end in itself in those other cosmologies. And what I want to say is that if we do the decolonial shift, at least in that simple thing, like bringing a different cosmological understanding to the production of technology, because technology is never neutral to cosmology. If we bring a different understanding, a decolonial turn from the way we think with this dualistic, scientific, Cartesian notion, destructive of life, and bring other cosmological understanding, we will have technologies that will have the rationality of reproduction of life. But the problem with Western civilization is that it has destroyed other forms of cosmology that are holistic and brought this dualism that brings and produces technologies that destroy other forms of life and life in general, to the point that we don't know which species will survive Western civilization. Not even the human species. We're sure that we will survive Western civilization. That's why I call it a civilization of death. Thank you very much.